biblical business skills that build generational millions are not secrets buried in seminary textbooks. They are architectural blueprints carved into the oldest wealth manual ever written, sitting there waiting for the builder who is serious enough to follow the design rather than improvise his way into collapse. Stay with this until the end. A prayer for wisdom and provision is waiting for you there. Here is what almost nobody talks about when they talk about Proverbs chapter 31. The woman in that passage does not wake up and start hustling. She evaluates first. Verse 16 reads, "She considers a field and buys it. With the fruit of her hands, she plants a vineyard." Consider that word. Considers. She does not move until she has examined the land, calculated the yield, and confirmed the return on what she is about to commit. That is not a character sketch of a busy woman trying to do it all. That is a capital protection protocol written 3,000 years before any business school existed, and it is more rigorous than most modern investment frameworks. Most people read Proverbs chapter 31 as a story about virtue, but when you read it as a builder, it becomes something else entirely, a structural manual. The virtuous woman is praised not for outworking everyone around her, but because her architecture holds when conditions get hard. Her household does not collapse when markets shift, and her family does not fear the winter because the winter was already accounted for in the design long before it arrived. Her protection comes from a system built on evaluation before expenditure, foundation before facade, and careful design before a single coin changed hands. This is where modern business culture gets it catastrophically wrong, and what follows will show you exactly how Solomon's blueprint corrects it. Every generation gets sold the same lie in a different package. In Solomon's era, they called it the wisdom of the crowd. Today, it comes wearing a microphone and a ring light telling you to outwork everyone and sleep less and post more. The package is new. The damage is identical. Picture this. Someone wakes up with a business idea that genuinely excites them. By noon, they have a logo. By evening, they have set up a social media page. By the following week, they have spent $2,000 on advertising for a product they have not yet proven anyone will actually pay for. The desire behind all of this is real. The energy is real, but none of it is sitting on a foundation. 3 months later, when the cash has disappeared and the excitement has dried up completely, they tell themselves they simply were not disciplined enough. But that diagnosis is wrong. What they are experiencing is a discipline problem that grew directly out of an architecture problem. And treating the surface symptom while the foundation stays broken means the next attempt ends in exactly the same place. Solomon addressed the root of this in Ecclesiastes chapter 10, verse 18. "Through laziness, the rafters sag. Because of idle hands, the house leaks." Most people quote that verse to condemn passivity, but read it through the eyes of a builder and something different emerges. The consequence Solomon names is structural failure. Sagging rafters, a leaking roof, a building that looked fine from the outside until the day it quietly gave way. He is describing someone who built without maintaining the load-bearing walls. And now the whole thing is deteriorating from the inside while the owner keeps adding furniture to the rooms. Motion without stewardship produces that kind of decay, and in some cases, it produces it faster than inaction would, because the man in constant motion burns through materials while the rot sets in behind him. Hard truth, hustle does not build empires. Deliberate design does. So, what actually separates the builder still standing a decade from now from the one who burns out trying to scale something with no floor beneath it? Profitability from the very beginning. Treat it as the governing discipline from the first transaction, rather than some distant reward you receive after years of burning through cash. The startup trap is elegant and genuinely deadly. Spend capital to grow to raise more capital, raise capital to spend again. Then describe the entire burning process as momentum. Solomon named this plainly in Proverbs chapter 12, verse 11. "Those who work their land will have abundant food, but those who chase fantasies have no sense." The fantasy is growth without a floor beneath it. The land with all its unglamorous daily demands is the system that actually produces something you can live on for years. Think about what Joseph built in Egypt before the famine came anywhere near the horizon. He did not gather the people and give speeches about abundance. He designed and constructed granaries, stored provision across 7 full years of surplus, and created a reserve so deliberately structured that when the collapse arrived, Egypt became the place the entire surrounding world came to for provision. That position of strength was not accidental, and it was not the result of working harder than the neighboring nations. It was the direct result of a man who refused to consume what was meant to be stored, who kept building the system even when the skies were clear and the harvests were generous, and there was no immediate pressure demanding he do so. Stop chasing the fantasy. Build the land. This is where the wisdom becomes almost overwhelming in its practical beauty. The system outlasts the sprint, profitability outlasts momentum, and protection outlasts promotion every single time. If that is already shifting something in how you see your own work, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching this from. This community is being built one builder at a time, and I want to know where you are standing today. Consider the ant, not as a motivational symbol for a poster, as a genuine engineering case study worth sitting with seriously. Solomon writes in Proverbs chapter 6, verses 6 through 8, "Go to the ant, you sluggard. Consider its ways and be wise. It has no commander, no overseer or ruler, yet it stores its provisions in summer and gathers its food at harvest." The detail almost every reader skips is the governance structure. No commander, no overseer, no ruler directing traffic from the top. The ant system runs without centralized authority because the intelligence is embedded in the system itself, not held in a single person whose absence would bring everything to a halt. When the leader disappears, the work continues because the work was never designed around the leader in the first place. Solomon deployed this exact governance model at a scale history has never seen replicated. 1 Kings chapter 4 records that he established 12 district governors, each one responsible for supplying the royal household for one full month of the year. Deliberately decentralized, each governor managing his own region, his own logistics, his own supply relationships. No single point where everything could fail at once. When one region faced difficulty, 11 others kept producing and delivering without interruption, and the whole machine kept running because it was designed from the beginning so that no single node could bring it down. That kind of structural resilience does not happen by accident. Someone had to decide early in the design process that the system would be stronger than any individual within it. Solomon also controlled trade routes connecting Egypt to Arabia to the eastern Mediterranean coast, operated copper refineries at Ezion-Geber, and maintained a merchant fleet completing voyages that lasted 3 years, returning with gold, silver, ivory, and rare materials from markets most contemporaries did not even know existed. 1 Kings chapter 10 verse 14 records that the weight of gold arriving to Solomon in a single year was 666 talents. By serious historical estimates, his accumulated wealth exceeded $2 trillion in today's terms. He reached that position by building systems that kept producing whether he was in the throne room or not, and that distinction is worth pausing on. The asset was the system. His personal presence was optional. The principle ancient tycoons understood, and that modern builders consistently underestimate, is straightforward. Wealth accumulates when you do the right things in the right sequence, and then allow the system to compound without constantly interrupting it. Now think about words, governing words specifically, not inspirational ones. Proverbs chapter 18 verse 21 says, "The tongue has the power of life and death." In the full context of Solomon's teaching, this is about influence, about how communication shapes the relationships that build trust, seal agreements, attract the right partners, and quietly erode the ones built on sand. A merchant whose word cannot be trusted has no real foundation regardless of how impressive his operation looks from outside. A leader whose communication generates confusion cannot govern a decentralized system because the people executing the design will fill that confusion with their own assumptions, and assumptions compound reliably in the wrong direction. Words are the governance layer of the entire operation, setting the culture before culture sets itself by default. Guard your words the way a builder guards his load-bearing walls. One crack left unaddressed shifts the whole structure in ways you will not immediately notice, but eventually will not be able to stop. If this wisdom is already rearranging how you see your work, take 1 second and like this video. That single action tells the algorithm this content deserves to reach more builders. Strategic silence is not weakness. For the serious builder, It is one of the most valuable disciplines available, and almost nobody treats it that way. Ecclesiastes chapter 3 verse 7 says, "There is a time to be silent and a time to speak." Most people hear personal relationship advice in that verse. Almost nobody applies it to resource deployment. Solomon is making a precise economic point. There are seasons when the most profitable thing available to you is complete stillness. Not because you lack courage or vision, but because the conditions are wrong. And committing resources into wrong conditions destroys both the capital and the opportunity it was meant to create. Lose both at once, and recovery costs more than the original commitment ever would have. Watch what happens when a builder violates this. He sees a competitor moving into a new space, and the anxiety fires immediately. Something in him says, "Respond now or fall behind permanently." So he commits resources before he has examined the terrain, before he knows whether the market is actually there, before he has any real evidence this moment is right for him specifically. And at that point, he has stopped building. He is simply reacting, chasing the noise rather than following the design. Solomon addressed this tendency in Proverbs chapter 29, verse 20. "Do you see someone who speaks in haste? There is more hope for a fool than for them." The same principle that governs words governs money and time. Haste applied to any of them produces the same result. What most people misread about patience is that it looks passive from the outside. It rarely is. Tertullian, writing in his work on patience in the late 2nd century, argued that genuine patience is an act of the will, a discipline that keeps the soul from being governed by external chaos, rather than by its own clear principles. He observed that the man lacking this interior steadiness becomes a servant of circumstance. Market moves command him, competitors redirect him. He has no stable axis to hold to because he traded interior discipline for the appearance of responsiveness. And over time, that trade destroys the enterprise from the inside out. Tertullian was not writing about commerce, but he was describing, with an accuracy that holds across centuries, the exact psychology that takes down builders who had every other skill in place. Consider then what Solomon calls the provision of the ant in Proverbs chapter 30, verse 25. Ants are creatures of little strength, yet they store up their food in the summer. The ant does not wait for a perfect season. It works in the current season to build capacity for the hard one that is certainly coming. And the enterprise built on that same principle does not merely survive difficulty. It is specifically designed to grow stronger when difficulty arrives. When competitors panic and liquidate, the builder with deep reserves moves in the opposite direction. When markets contract and weaker operations start failing, the business that held its position through the lean months finds itself with room and resources to expand into territory others have been forced to vacate. For the prepared builder, economic famine is the activation event, not the threat. Look at what Joseph's granaries actually accomplished in practice. Food storage was the surface function. The deeper function was consolidating political and economic authority across the entire surrounding region. Every nation arriving to buy grain was entering a transaction that positioned Egypt as the dominant power in that world. The famine did not threaten the system Joseph built. It revealed what that system was always designed to do, and it did so in the most decisive and public way possible. Build for the famine, not out of fear, but because you intend to be the one still standing and still operating when the season turns. The Proverbs 31 business model contains one feature almost every commentary ignores, and it is arguably the most practically important detail in the entire passage. Verse 14 says, "She is like the merchant ships, bringing her food from afar." This is not poetic language about effort or diligence in a general sense. It is a literal description of supply chain diversification, of deliberately building a sourcing network that extends beyond the immediate geography, because total dependence on local conditions is a structural vulnerability, regardless of how skilled or faithful the operator is in every other respect. One drought, one failed harvest, one disrupted local supply, and the builder who never looked beyond her neighborhood has nothing left to work with. In the biblical framework, diversification is the architecture of wisdom applied to genuine uncertainty. Ecclesiastes chapter 11 verse 2 says, "Invest in 7 ventures, yes, in 8. You do not know what disaster may come upon the land." Solomon is not counseling fear here. He is acknowledging that the future is genuinely unknown to any human being, and concentrating everything into a single position is a form of presumption dressed as boldness. That presumption becomes the mechanism of collapse when the test arrives, and the test always arrives. This is exactly where Jesus' teaching in Matthew chapter 7 moves from comfort to architectural mandate. Everyone who hears these words of mine and puts them into practice is like a wise man who built his house on the rock. The rain came down, the streams rose, and the winds blew and beat against that house. Yet it did not fall because it had its foundation on the rock. Read it carefully as a builder. The storm tested both men with identical intensity and made no distinction between the sincere and the careless, went no easier on the who worked harder or prayed more. The only variable determining which house was still standing was what it rested on before the storm arrived. And that decision had been made long before the first cloud appeared. In a business context, the rock is operating principles that do not shift with economic conditions, combined with retained provision deep enough to outlast what finishes everyone who built on something softer. The foolish builder failed because he placed his structure on ground that could not hold it under pressure, and by the time the weakness became visible, there was nothing left to do about it. Here is what most conversations about business finance consistently miss. Retained provision is the real moat, and its power comes not from how much you are earning, but from the discipline of what you are choosing to keep. Impressive revenue can still leave you exposed if most of it flows back out to fund growth, lifestyle, or the appearance of scale. The resources kept inside the fortress, unconsumed and protected, are what give you the capacity to survive what is currently dismantling the builders around you. Proverbs chapter 21:20 says, "The wise store up choice food and olive oil, but fools gulp theirs down." The fool in that verse may have earned just as much as the wise man. The difference was that he consumed what was designed to be stored, and his income became the ceiling of his lifestyle rather than the foundation of something durable. Abraham accumulated steadily across decades. Joseph stored with extraordinary discipline during years of abundance. Solomon systematized the accumulation so that it continued producing without requiring constant personal intervention. These were not three different approaches. They were three expressions of the same underlying principle applied to three different contexts. And that principle is simply this: the builder who treats what he earns as something to be stewarded rather than consumed is the builder who still has something to work with when everyone else has run out. Your retained provision is the most active asset in your operation because it is what lets you sleep with genuine peace when the storm that is dismantling others finally reaches your door. Teresa of Avila understood something about execution that most builders, whether they are building a business or simply a life that holds together under pressure, never fully grasp until they have already paid the cost of not knowing it. In her interior castle, she wrote with remarkable precision about a specific kind of danger: the soul that has filled itself with movement, knowledge, and religious effort, but never established a governing center. She called it a castle with many rooms and no foundation point. And the person living in that castle moves constantly, accumulates impressively, produces the appearance of progress, but arrives nowhere lasting because nothing they build is anchored to anything that actually holds when pressure is applied. That image is striking enough when applied to the spiritual life. Applied to a business, it is a description of exactly how most enterprises that look impressive in year one are gone by year 4. Hustle is movement without a center, and that distinction matters more than most people realize until it is too late. Real business architecture is governed from a non-negotiable core, from principles that do not bend when the short-term noise gets loud enough. Teresa was writing about the soul, but she was simultaneously describing the interior condition of every enterprise. The leader who has not developed the discipline of detachment becomes a servant of urgency. He abandons the blueprint when immediate pressure arrives, picks it up again when things calm down, abandons it again at the next disruption, and over time those accumulated abandonments are precisely what the eventual collapse is made of. Not one dramatic failure, but a long series of small departures from the design. Everything laid out today comes down to one conclusion that does not require sophisticated training to understand. Hustle makes you tired. Real business architecture makes you untouchable, not because it shields you from storms, but because you built the foundation before the storm arrived, and it holds while everything constructed on softer ground collapses around you and becomes, if you are positioned correctly, the raw material for your next season of growth. The builders still standing in 10 years are the ones who evaluated carefully before committing resources, who stored they consumed, who diversified their supply chains before they needed to, who kept their retained provision as a fortress wall before the market had the chance to test them. They learned from the ants' governance model, built reserves like Joseph during the years of abundance, sourced broadly like the Proverbs 31 architect, and founded everything on the rock Jesus described in Matthew chapter 7 with a plainness that leaves no room for reinterpretation. This is the ancient blueprint, not a secret kept from ordinary people, but a design that has always been available to every builder willing to follow the structure rather than improvise around it. Close your eyes if you can, or align your thoughts with mine now. Father, we come before you as builders. We acknowledge that every resource we steward, every system we construct, every decision we face belongs to you and is answerable to your wisdom. Grant us the clarity to evaluate before we act, the discipline to retain before we consume, and the courage to build foundations that hold when the storms come and the seasons turn hard. Remove from us the anxiety that drives us toward haste, and replace it with the settled clarity that produces structures capable of lasting beyond us. Let our enterprises become visible testimonies of your architectural intelligence, working through human hands that chose to follow the design. Protect our provision, multiply what we consecrate to your purposes. Give us the patient discipline of Joseph, the governance wisdom of Solomon, and the foundational integrity of the builders who built on rock and were still standing when the rain finally stopped. We receive this wisdom now, and we commit to building with it from this day forward. Amen. May your foundation be deep, your provision stored, and your walls strong enough to outlast every season that tries to move you. Go build. If these ancient blueprints have changed the way you view your business and your life, please subscribe to our channel and like this video. We are uncovering the timeless wisdom that the modern world has tried to bury. Let us build a future that lasts. The next treasure of knowledge will be revealed soon.